One of my favorite things to say to couples who are seeking pre-marriage counseling is, when you fight, be sure to fight fair. Now, most couples don't want to acknowledge that they've had a fight, and they certainly don't want to think that they ever will. But we know that where there are people, there are always going to be differences and conflicts. Whether it's in marriages, families, or church communities, these are no exception. One of my most beloved grandfathers used to say, "Let sleeping dogs lie." Now, I loved him dearly, but I don't think that's good advice. Trying to ignore the elephants in the room in relationships takes enormous amounts of energy, and it ends up robbing us of intimacy. So what if we had some basic ethics around conflict? What if we refused to avoid conflict, but we insisted on fighting fair? This training time is dedicated to encouraging you, equipping you, and empowering you for caring conflict. Brothers and sisters, fight fair. Most of us learned a conflict style from very early on. I first learned this when I began dating the person who would become my wife. The first time I was in the family kitchen, I asked where the garbage can was. And with some astonishment, they said to me, "Well, where else would it be? It's under the kitchen sink." Now, I had never experienced that before, so when I opened the cabinet door, imagine my surprise when there was a small, delicate garbage can out of plain sight. This was very different from the home that I grew up in, a home that had a large trash can out in the open. This became for us in our marriage a metaphor for how our families dealt with conflict. One out in the open, the other behind closed doors. Now, whether we realize it or not, we start from a place of home, and our parents modeled a way of dealing with conflict or not dealing with conflict that many of us practice to this day. We tend to repeat what we saw modeled for us. So the question for us today is, how can we practice good stewardship with our conflict and with our anger? Stewardship is about intentional care and management of something. How do we steward anger? How do we steward conflict so that we handle it in a responsible way? Now, there are different responses to disappointment and anger that often we find ourselves trying to navigate in terms of how we relate to that emotion. Some of us were taught that anger is bad, or that it's scary, or don't go to bed angry, or anger is sin, or when you're angry, run away. Oftentimes, these messages that we learned from an early age are not helpful. So David Augsburger highlights 5 ways for us to deal with conflict, and I'd like to provide an overview for us today. Number 1, Augsburger says there are winners and there are losers. And in number 1, I win and you lose. That view of conflict says the stakes are very high and I need to protect myself and my ego. I regard myself, my values, the things I care about as so high that I need to win at all costs, and I can show no weakness. My view of others in such an approach is that I view you as lower, I don't respect you as much, and I don't care about the boundaries that exist between us. Notice that this view has to live in some denial and attacks weakness. It calls it out because I must win. That's number 1. Number 2, Augsburger says there's a view of winners and losers. I lose and you win. Anger is a dangerous contest. I don't have a strong sense of self or a high view of myself. I don't regard the boundaries as something to be protected, and I become your doormat. My view of others then is way too high. In this view, I can only see the weakness in myself and not in someone else. The third view is, I am out of here. You run from conflict. Such a view of conflict says there's going to be casualties. Conflict can be lethal. It can be life-threatening. It's a view of yourself where you're fearful, where you need to preserve yourself or preserve someone else from the discomfort of the conflict. Such a view of others is keeping someone else at arm's length. This is someone who could hurt me. This is someone who could get to know me. For folks who operate out of this kind of mindset, they oftentimes have a closer relationship with fear than with people. They tend to avoid closeness. Even if conflict had its benefits, the costs are way too high, so I'm out of here. The fourth view is let's compromise 50-50. Since neither of us are going to be happy in this arrangement, we're going to be uncomfortable with the anger, the disappointment, or the conflict. We need to pursue a necessary and transactional view of relationships. We need to pursue a strategy. And we fail to see that life has relationships in it where we can move and grow. Instead, we have to get something done. We have to come to some kind of treaty where we meet each other halfway. This view says I have to defend my self-interests. It also says of someone else that they have needs too, which is a good thing. But there's no way that we're going to come to terms together fully. Augsburger advocates a fifth path, and that's what he calls care-fronting. I care enough to engage in this relationship. This view of conflict says conflict can be transformative and instructive. Conflict can be good and necessary. Conflict can protect relationship. It can exercise care over it. Conflict clarifies things, and it is about protecting the container of this relationship. This view recognizes that where bones are broken, they can become stronger in the places that they have been broken. But this takes time and energy, and it takes a willingness to heal and to grow and to step into something unknown. This is a high-stakes emotional game, but it holds a high view of self and a high view of others. It honors your view and the other's view. It honors your perspective and the other person's perspective. It honors the relationship as a teacher of new and good things. Sometimes I will lead a class or a presentation, and Tusk, the stuffed elephant, will join me. It usually takes people a while before they get comfortable with the obvious and then choose to name it. When they do, when they ask, so what is that elephant all about anyway? I will stop everything in that moment, and I will try and make the point that this is oftentimes how we human beings work. It takes a while for us to be comfortable with naming the obvious. So I want to give us 12 things to think about around conflict that will help us have some ethics as we try and steward our conflict and steward our anger. Number one, we have very few good models for healthy conflict today. We may be very pioneering when we try healthy conflict, so be gentle with yourself as you learn to practice it. Conflicts are inevitable, so why fight it? When couples come to me for premarriage counseling, they often will say, we never ever fight. And I usually pause and I raise my eyebrows and I remind them that that's not necessarily a good thing. You need to learn how to fight fair. Number two, conflicts need a container. Conflicts need stewardship. Stewardship means care and attention. Oftentimes, the last thing that our conflicts need is neglect. Sometimes conflict needs to be measured. Fire often needs a fireplace. Number three, conflict is a form of intimacy. Conflict can be an intimate affair, and intimacy always involves vulnerability. And vulnerability needs safety and tender handling and care. The question is, can I stay close when matters of the heart are involved, or must I flee to protect you or to protect me? Conflict is a form of intimacy. Number four, we need to recognize that underneath anger is hurt. Anger is really just the tip of the iceberg, but underneath that anger is hurt. Oftentimes, anger feels safer than revealing hurt because hurt involves weakness and vulnerability. For some, anger is a much safer emotion to express than hurt, but just know that underneath anger, there is always a wound. Anger signals that I care about something. Anger says something has either been minimized that I care deeply about, or it's been trespassed. An expectation that I have has not been met, or something that I care deeply about has been stepped on. That doesn't mean that I'm right. It's just a dashboard indicator that something I care about is being taken casually. Most of our hurts get smaller when they can be named and when they can be heard by someone else. Number 5, blaming is an avoidance strategy. Blaming another is avoidance. It shifts attention from ourselves to our experience and puts that on someone else. Many of us were raised thinking that someone else always has to be at fault for our emotional response. This isn't helpful and actually pulls us away from ourselves and pulls us away from engaging the feeling that we have and asking ourselves, so why am I feeling this way? We have to live with the responses that we have, and we have to deal with them. That doesn't mean that others don't wrong us. It doesn't mean that others don't hurt us deeply. It just means that we have to deal with and live with ourselves long after someone else is in the picture. People who are uncomfortable with pain and hurt tend to talk about issues and truths and facts, each of which pulls us out of ourselves and our emotions and into our ideas. It pulls us out of relationship, out of engagement, and pulls us into our heads. So blaming tends to deflect attention away from the things that really matter most in relationships. Relationships, pain, and our shared humanity. This is what we need to engage in relationship. Blaming is an avoidance strategy. Number 6, conflict is a process. Conflicts generally need clarity more than they need a solution. That means that this is a mutual process. When we enact it together, new truths are birthed and things are revealed in us that we perhaps didn't know about or perhaps weren't aware of. Things get articulated that otherwise would have remained behind closed doors and unspoken. The process should be taken seriously, but not always literally. Naming our truths is freeing. Naming our elephants tends to tame them. Number 7, how we say it matters. In fact, how we say it is oftentimes as important or more important than what we say. Number 8, conflict always requires the changing of a goal. The goal of conflict ought not be winning. The goal of conflict is to hear. Let me say that again. The goal of conflict is not to win in relationship. The goal needs to be about hearing. Number 9, tell the truth, but tell it in love. Our truths of pain need to be told and they need to be heard, but that needs to happen in non-damaging ways. It needs to happen in ways that don't hurt me as the teller or you as the hearer. It needs to do so in such a way that the relationship is not damaged. We need to ensure that the emotional and relational bridges between us can bear the freight of the truths of our pain. So sometimes that may mean waiting. Sometimes that may mean distilling our message in such a way where we share a few words rather than multiple paragraphs. Tell the truth, but do so in love. Number 10, we need to work hard at listening and staying open. Under stress, we tend to close down and our defenses rise. We need to find ways to stay open. In stress, we tend to cling to our certainties. Relationships that thrive do so on curiosity and inquiry, not on certainty and facts. So listen and reflect, repeat and respond, Don't react. Number 11, apologies help a lot. Apologies that can acknowledge hurt without an explanation can carry immense freight. Number 12, grace is about letting go of hurt. And when we do, letting go of anger is sure to follow. Grace enables us to imagine and see another person in a different narrative, other than the way that they hurt us. We need to recognize that there's always more to someone else's story than that we are able to see. Compassion for another is a gateway to entry-level forgiveness. So seeing the other person and their story and what they are working with is the building block for something new in relationship. The story they are telling themselves is a really good way in, and the only way you can do that is by listening and understanding. So build bridges. Don't bear false witness to what you are feeling. Put relationship before the need to be right about something. See if you can find common ground. Lou Smedes once said, "It's as if God said to us, 'Try forgiveness on one another.' It worked for me." Brothers and sisters, use care in your conflict and fight fair.